Hello, my name is Kenneth Dillon. I'm an historical and scientific researcher, and I'm here today to talk with you about my theory of the outer solar system origin of the terrestrial planets. Also, according to uh, we can generalize the theory of Immanuel Velikovsky about the origin of Venus into referring to the origin of all of the planets of the inner solar system. And in order to do that, we have first to correct a fundamental mistake that Velikovsky made, and that was that he argued that Venus exploded from Jupiter, and that was something that scientists found very hard to accept. And so it hurt the credibility of his entire theory. But in fact, we can see, and this was actually written up in 1978, the year before Velikovsky's death, by two researchers, but they were ignored, that we can see that a better explanation by far is that Jupiter, with its immense gravity, pulled from the outer solar system this planet Venus, and then Venus heated up, became a comet in effect, and took off into the inner solar system. And we can see excellent reasons to credit this version, which of course Velikovsky was not able to comment on. But the reasons are that the ancient depictions of Venus showed it as an ovoid, as if it had been stretched in a tidal locking position, had been stretched by Jupiter's gravity. And also we can see the outstanding anomaly of the slow rotation retrograde of Venus is caused by tidal locking. And at the same time, another anomaly, and that is the super rotation of Venus's atmosphere, is also clearly a result of tidal locking to Jupiter. So these things, none of them were known to Velikovsky, but they strengthen his basic theory, which is that Venus repeatedly passed by the Earth during the Bronze Age, causing all kinds of catastrophes on Earth, and then gradually circularized its orbit. So if we take this as the basis for a generalization, we can say that there was a planet that I call Terra Mars, formed outside of the orbit of Saturn, most likely, and at around 4.47 billion years ago, it was pulled into the area of Jupiter and past Jupiter, heating up and tidally locking to Jupiter, and Jupiter extracted from Terra Mars, from the Pacific Basin. It extracted what became the planet Mars. And then Earth and Mars sped off into the inner solar system as red hot comets, and then gradually found their places in the inner solar system. We can see the present day evidence of all of this, not on the surface of the Earth, but we can see some evidence inside of the Earth, and that is the center of the geomagnetic field is removed from the figure of the center of figure of Earth, and it's actually to be found under the Sea of Japan. So that gives us some feeling that actually there is a very lopsided nature of the Earth that came from this. At the same time, on Mars, the southern hemisphere of Mars is the original surface of the Pacific Basin. And therefore, the only remaining surface of Terra Mars. So it's of exceptional scientific importance. And not surprisingly, on the southern hemisphere of Mars, we can find the kind of magnetic striping alternating, just as you would find in the various oceans of the world today. Mars does not have a dynamo to cause a powerful geomagnetic field like that. So we also have other evidence on Earth about this. They match the size. The size of Mars roughly matches the dimensions of the Pacific Basin, and it is actually also a very good explanation of the so-called ring of fire, which doesn't fit well at all into ordinary plate tectonics. So what we should do is think of it as the ring of fire and these other pieces of evidence that, for instance, there's seismic anomalies down to 2,700 kilometers beneath the Pacific Basin, or that there are two large provinces of very slow seismic activity underneath the Pacific Basin. It's called Jason. On the Antipodes, underneath Africa, it's called Tuzo. And the larger one is the Pacific Basin one, which fits. And those are leftovers from this separation event. So there are quite a few pieces of evidence about this. And the nice thing about it is that the southern hemisphere of Mars is something that is wide open to being investigated in much more detail. Several hundred million years later, probably around 3.95 billion years ago, another planet in this area outside probably of the orbit of modern day Saturn, another planet that I call Merculuna. Merculuna was pulled by Jupiter in a very similar way into the inner solar system. And as it passed Jupiter and heated up, it tidally locked to Jupiter, and Jupiter extracted from the North Pole of Mercury, it extracted the moon. And then the two comets both sped off into the inner solar system. And the moon was coming at a speed and from a direction that was clearly, as was all Merculuna in effect, the same trajectory, had roughly the same trajectory, the same velocity, and the same fate as Earth. It ended up in the same orbit as Earth had around the sun, and gradually was attracted to Earth, and it gradually was captured by Earth. So this is the capture theory of the origin of the Earth-Moon system. And we have overcome in this theory, the main objection to the capture theory was always that there was no braking mechanism that would slow some incoming moon down to the speed of Earth. But we can see, because both Earth and Moon went through this same trajectory, several hundred million years apart, past Jupiter, and they apparently originated in the same part of the outside of Saturn's orbit area of the outer solar system. So they had very similar chemistry, and that would account for the identical oxygen ratios. But at any rate, they both had the same braking mechanism. As they left Jupiter, and that was Jupiter's gravity itself slowed them down in exactly the same way. So according to Kepler's third law, they would end in the same orbit and so on. So the capture theory has many strong points if explained in this way. And one of them is that the main competing theory is the giant impact theory. And that's really, it's an hypothesis, it's a model, it's been extensively modeled and repeatedly changed, but it can't do certain things. It can't, for instance, account for the three chief moments of inertia of the moon. And the capture theory, according to Osso, accounts for those very nicely. The moon has paleomagnetism, which makes no sense taken in an isolated way, but makes perfect sense if it is a reflection of its origin as part of Merculuna, so that it received the geomagnetic field or the lunar field from the Merculuna dynamo. And both of those have a similar appearance in the sense that they're heavily cratered. And the explanation of Osso is that this was not from the so-called late heavy bombardment. There was no such thing as a late heavy bombardment. Actually, this was from the two planets passing back and forth through in their very elliptical orbits at first, through the asteroid belt. And the same thing happened with Mars. That's why the southern hemisphere of Mars is so heavily battered. Mercury and Moon also have other features in common. They have a similar albedo, and the iron, as I pointed out, is complementary. So there's some very good reasons to think that this is correct as an explanation. We can see that this theory explains a number of otherwise anomalous aspects of the inner solar system. The first is that it explains the lopsidedness, particularly of Mars and of the Moon. Mars, for instance, has a crust in the north that is only 35 kilometers thick, whereas in the southern hemisphere, the average crust thickness is 80 kilometers. And at the same time, the Moon has on its near side a crust that is 60 kilometers thick, and on the far side, which was the surface of Merculuna, so the near side was the part where it broke apart. On the far side, the average thickness of the crust is 100 kilometers, although at the South Pole Aitken Basin, which is the giant impact crater, it's much thinner. We can also see that the center of the mass in Mars is to the north, and the center of mass of the Moon is to the near side. And the separation point on the near side of the Moon from Mercury was the Oceanus Procellarum, which is clearly not an impact basin. It's the largest, however, such basin or whatever on the near side, and it has a magnetic anomaly surrounding it in a kind of rectangular pattern, which has drawn the attention of scientists, but they don't have an explanation. Well, the explanation is this is where the Moon tore apart from that North Pole, which is now at the depression at the North Pole of Mercury. So we see that there are a number of ways in which the lopsidedness can be accounted for. A second anomaly is it solves the question of the source and the distribution of water in the inner solar system. It makes sense of it all. Much better than trying to have to explain that there are comets bombarding and so on. This is a very simple explanation, and it suggests that there is more water to be found, perhaps under the surfaces of some of the planets. We certainly know it's true in Earth. A third anomaly. According to the in situ model of the formation of the inner solar system planets, in other words, that they were formed exactly where they are now, according to that model, all the dust and all the matter in the inner solar system had to form those planets very rapidly to form them more rapidly than we would expect, because otherwise the smaller particles would be pushed out by the solar wind and by radiation pressure pushed out into the outer solar system, while the larger particles would be pulled in by drags of various types, drags into the sun. And therefore, there'd be no material there to form the planets. So they must have formed very fast. No need for that explanation with Oso. They didn't form there, and so you didn't have to use any material that wasn't there anyway. So that's a simplification. And another anomaly that this also explains is it explains why Mars and the asteroid belt have such low masses compared to Earth and Venus. If they had formed from all the material that was available in the inner solar system, you would expect them to be much larger. Well, the material wasn't available. Not the asteroids necessarily, but Mars in particular came from the outer solar system. If you want to know more about the theory, there's a detailed written account of it on my website, scienciapress.com. I'll give the URL at the end. Thank you very much for listening.